to be or not to be. Everything we see is a shadow cast by that which we do not see. If a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Seeing is not always believing. We are not makers of history, but made by history.
Speaking as a doctor, I think your daughter ought to be heavily sedated and immediately institutionalized.
Well, speaking as a lawyer, I can only say that your daughter suits the criminal profile to a T. Right down to the low-sloping forehead and the wide jaw suitable for grains and small rodents.
I think you must have her confused with your mama.
That's it, Uncle Phil. You're grounded.
You know, I'd be happy to prescribe something for that.
There's a social construction of masculinity. And I think for what we call hegemonic masculinity, that man has to be Christian, he has to be middle class or wealthy, a property owner, Christian, heterosexual, within a certain age group. And those are probably some of the categories or criterias for hegemonic masculinity. Now, Patricia Hill Collins talks about in her book, I believe it's Black Sexual Politics, chapter 4, I think, Very Necessary, where she talks about black gender ideology. And she actually breaks, she has a 3-tiered category for the construction of masculinity. So there's the first tier, which is hegemonic masculinity, the wealthy property white men. And then she has a second tier, which is for subordinate men, which would be men of lower class, like not low class, but economically challenged white men would go into that, the second tier. And then the third tier would be for racial and ethnic minorities. And so then she talks about the ways in which, if you're at the third tier, so if you think about a hierarchy, you think about a ladder, so at the top is white, wealthy, property men. In the middle would be white men that are economically challenged in comparison to these wealthy men. And then on the last rung of the ladder would be racial and ethnic minority men. And you think about it in that way. So can you move up the ladder? And so she talks about the ways in which you can switch from one tier to the next tier. But what she says is that because hegemonic masculinity is constructed around the person, is also constructed around race, then men of color cannot move to the first tier. So she's created a 4th category, which she calls honorary white man. And the honorary white man would be the man of color that has the wealth, that has the property, that's Christian, heterosexual, that meets all of the other criteria of hegemonic masculinity, except for he's not white. And so we could think of maybe a Colin Powell, maybe even a Barack Obama would be considered honorary white men. And that's not to say that Barack Obama or Colin Powell considers themselves to be honorary white men, but they still would fit that particular category. So when she thinks about the construction of masculinity, and as she thinks about it for people of color, and in particular for men of color, she thinks about that it's not just hegemonic masculinity and that every single man fits into that category. She sees it as a hierarchy that's based on race and class.
I think he should be educated. Whether it's the institution of higher learning or a associate degree, or just even complete high school and specialize in a skill.
Respectful, honest, challenging, loving, caring, all that makes up.
You have to look at the way he treats his mother, his sisters,
Right.
his aunts. I mean,
Exactly.
if they don't treat me right, they're going to treat me right.
Right.
I believe society categorizes the male as someone who's supposed to be strong despite his personal circumstances. There's little room to show emotion unless that emotion is categorized towards, celebration or extreme loss. There's no middle ground generally when it comes to how society views, emotions in a man, basically.
In Black America, there seems to be this notion that real men don't cry. And I would challenge that.
It's nothing bad for a man to cry. Everybody needs to cry sometimes. So I don't agree with the thing that a man is not supposed to cry, because he is supposed to.
Society tells us that women are supposed to be the ones that are overly expressive with their emotions. So I would kind of want a man that wasn't that way.
Or at least knows how to control his emotions.
Exactly.
You don't have to suppress them, just channel them.
Right.
I think the male is expected to be the goal setter, the person of strength, the person of character, the person who keeps the family or the child on course, the person who determines if our goals are realized, the person who's expected to fund the ability to reach those goals. I think that's kind of the expected role of the male.
Men can do whatever they want to do with no repercussions, and that women are generally socially sanctioned by whatever their sexual behavior is, and that it's a double standard in the sense that both people can do the exact same act, and one group will have no what I would call social sanctions. As a matter of fact, they actually get rewarded socially for certain types of behavior.
Man gets up in the morning, he lists the top 10 things he has to worry about when throughout the day, regardless of what he does. Things like rape are not on the list. Things assault and battery and things of that nature just not on the list, because by the fact of him being a man, he's less susceptible to be the victim of such a occurrence.
Because I'm in law enforcement, men have a privilege of being more respected in my career field. I get challenged a lot more because I am a woman. And most men, I think, when they're hiring for positions like CEOs, CFOs, any type of executive position, I think they kind of stray toward men, especially if they're trying to fill a quota. Like if they need to have an African American, they can do an African American male, and they fulfill that black quota. But then sometimes it can fall the other way with women. But I still think men have an advantage when it comes to holding executive positions in major companies.
I think that they can advance faster in the corporate arena, faster than women. Women, it seems to be a glass ceiling effect. But men, it seems like, they're in it for less time and they're advancing at a faster rate for some reason.
I would say that I